And welcome, everybody, to episode number 14 of You Can't Say That, SOC119 podcast about class culture and other topics. Today we are joined by a special guest, a new potential host of You Can't Say That. We're going to talk about some of the changes we'll be making to the podcast soon, but welcome, Dr. Lori Mulvey.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Yeah, nice to have you.
I feel like I'm in some really new territory here, so this is going to be fun.
Although we did a World in Conversation podcast for a short bit.
Yeah, but I don't even, was I a part of that?
I think you were.
Maybe one episode, yeah.
But
as the director.
But now we're 14 episodes into this one. We also have Sam and Darnisha and Joy. And behind, actually switching the buttons, is Darnisha this week.
I know. I apologize for my slow switching. I am not used to this high-stakes environment, surprisingly.
You're in it, though. You're in it. You're in it for the win.
I'm trying my best.
Hey, so let's go.
So can I ask? Is that what you want me to do? Ask things, say things?
Why don't you see what you feel comfortable with,
Well,
and then we're.
I have the intention, because my understanding was that you all were. This is sort of the behind the scenes of SOC119 in a lot of different ways. And so I was thinking that it would be cool to actually go behind the scenes sort of in your mind, Sam, or in your work, or in what I think is actually your art, and enlighten us on, and really like your teaching and your pedagogy. And I don't think this is an easy thing for you to do. So I think we're going to have to sort of wrestle you into saying some things that you actually think. Anyway, so my intention is to get him to say some things about what he's doing and what his intentions are that he rarely says. And I think my humble opinion is that this is a way that Sam is more like an artist. And, you know, oftentimes you look at someone's art and they say, well, what do you think it is? They don't really tell you. And I think there's some of that is because you can't necessarily articulate something that you're doing via art. And that's why you do art, because it's a three-dimensional expression. And so I think that goes on with you, Sam.
Okay.
And so I think our job today is to try to see if we can get you to say some things in sentences that could be enlightening about why all this is happening.
Well, this also then will be a perfect opportunity at some point to bring another guest that we have here with us in the room in, because we have someone who was a student back 20 years ago.
Who just happened to join us today.
Yeah.
So we haven't introduced him yet, but
we shall.
We have to run everything through him. Does this seem true to him?
So, okay, well, let's start, because I think it's cool that we have, so kind of what my vision is, but then between Jeff and Darnisha and Joy, we have three other perspectives from behind the scenes about what they're seeing is happening, and more in touch kind of, I think, with the students and with different folks. So, yeah. So let's do that. Let's make that the theme of the day, and we can talk about the past couple of class periods and move from there.
Yeah, that would be good to have some examples from what you're actually doing in class.
All right.
But maybe you could start, Sam, by just trying your best to tell us what it is that you're doing as a teacher.
Well, I think what I've always done as a teacher, I've never had a philosophy per se as a teacher ever. And so I would be asked.
See what I mean?
Well,
I disagree, and that's. But
I've never had one.
Start there.
I've never had one that I could or would articulate, and I've never wanted to articulate it because it felt like it would get in the way. I'd start imagining that I was doing something for a particular reason, and I have to stick with that reason, and I never wanted to do that. And so I would just kind of go in and do what felt natural, and I think what felt natural would be to reveal the discoveries that I have in my life. So I'm a learner who gets surprised at things, and always sort of trying to seek out and discover surprising things about the world that I didn't know. And then I bring those into the classroom, and that really is pretty much all I've ever done, starting with the very first class that I taught. And so I suppose if there's a sort of a method to the madness, it would be to reveal surprises, right? And that I think are surprising, but doesn't mean that anybody else will.
But this is where I feel like all of us can have a voice in this conversation, because I think that and we're going to keep getting you to try to say things, but like you do something in a classroom that isn't really part of that I think is actually kind of beyond words. And I have a feeling that all of us are part of this, because there's something that has happened in your work that we've been touched by in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know that when I have, way back in the day, before our friend Sean, who's here watching us, I also was in your class.
You were indeed.
And
1986.
So I also have a direct experience, and I know when I'm watching your lectures or watching the case studies that you do in class, I know when you're hitting that sort of signature Sam work that I think is like, that touches something in different people at different times, right? And I don't know how to name that. And so I kind of feel like maybe all of us together can, because you're trying to share surprises, but lots of teachers are trying to do things in the classroom, and there's something that you do that has you in the midst of these controversial topics that doesn't feel like chance.
Mm-hmm. Well,
I don't know, but can maybe someone else say something like,
what comes to mind with what Lori is saying?
I think.
Can I ask you specifically, like, before you say that example, what do you think when I say that there's some kind of quality that's touches students in certain ways, and it's hard to define what that is?
I think what you're touching on is probably exactly what MK expressed in our podcast about there's just a level of energy that exudes that kind of reflects or relays or translate a level of passion and authenticity in relaying a message.
But what about for you, Joy?
That's also my experience too. So I think it's all the same answer. So that's exactly probably what it is. That's not something that you can put into words or is put into words, but it's done to be effective, but not on purpose. It's just the way that it's translated through the being. But I think he does it in a way, and he's articulated that it's like how he shares with things as he learns them as well. And it's all laid out for people to have their own interpretations of it, not this is so because I'm the professor and this is what I study and these are the facts. It's I'm gonna lay this information out for you and you take with it what you will. And I just hope it makes you a little bit more of a better person. And even that in and of itself isn't I'm doing this because I need a job. This is my job and I get paid for it. It's more selfless than that. It's more like this is an actual thing that I find important for the world that we live in, for the events that take place that we are not aware of.
I want to talk about eventually the stickiness of that and the dangerousness and the controversial nature of
I think
one
of the earlier podcasts, I think I asked, when he's doing these things, does he put in consideration of maybe not validating people's assumptions? And
what's dangerous about that in your mind?
Because it could be the exact opposite end of the spectrum of, I just want you to leave here as a better person. If it's validating levels of ignorance, it's the exact opposite.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sam, what are you?
I never think about that.
You never think about what?
I don't ever trip up over the idea that that people will leave with a mind that's more closed than the one that they came in with. I have the idea that they'll be confused, and so the confusion is a positive thing because I think that in trying to resolve the confusion, people will have to consider some of the things that I say, which I think are mostly things that are interesting. Oh, I don't know.
Tell us something. I was going to say give us an example, but give us an example. I'll go there as to like how it is that you're so sure that people's confusion will lead them to think better, or that be a key part of learning. What tells you that in your own experience?
Well, I think that we only start asking questions when we're confused, right? I mean, there's no other reason to ask questions. And so I think part of the downfall of modern day education is we're trying to bring people in and together in these rooms and force them to ask questions that they're really not interested in asking because they're not confused. They're just like, why would I want to ask this question about biology or you know, like the division of cells or whether Pluto is a planet or, you know, I've never had the question. I'm not confused by any of it. So why would I do that?
Mm-hmm.
And so I have the idea that, well, at least if I put questions in people's minds and jumble things up, some thoughts up a little bit, when they have to stumble upon that a second time or somewhere down the road, they'll at least recognize that, hey, I'm going to have to be a little bit thoughtful about what's being stated or what I'm thinking.
What's the hardest for you as a person who is in this role?
Want to know what the hardest thing increasingly is for me? This is really odd.
Wait, is this like one of those Sam revelation? You're going to reveal something to
No.
only those of us who are listening to this?
No. Yeah, well, it's kind of, I hate to say it, but it's not that I hate to say it, but I never really had, maybe I did. You can decide whether I had it. Increasingly, I'm finding as the years go by and I find I accept that I'm acquiring a little bit more wisdom, so to speak, and thoughtful approaches and thoughtful ideas that are really pretty thoughtful compared to things that I hear people saying.
Or that you used to say in your classroom 20 years ago?
Yeah, that I used to say in my classroom 35 years ago. God, I said some really stupid things. But I recognized they were stupid. I knew at the time that in 20 years, I would look back and shake my head in grief and sadness. But increasingly, as I can't listen to people talk about things, say like in the media or like people interviewing folks about, who knows, modern day events, whatever it is, because I find myself just immensely intolerant. And as I just see how complicated issues are, and I find myself actually able to live in the middle of the complications and the contradictions and the so on, I'm intolerant of listening to people who just exhibit or put ideas out in the world that are just, so uninformed. And, oh my God. And so I just can't listen to anything. That becomes difficult.
So usually, though, I think somehow that intolerance is coming from a place of, like you're trying to protect something because something matters.
Yeah,
and,
truth.
so intolerance, we don't like intolerance.
Yeah, I'm trying to protect truth. There is a truth. I mean, the truth is complicated, and I'm never going to get to it, and I don't think you can get to it. But I know when we're running away in the opposite direction, and that's what I see a lot. When I hear that kind of thing, I just say, no, you can't go in the opposite direction. That's just you're missing 90% of reality by making that 10% statement. So please just stop, or I just will close off, or I'll leave. I can't listen to it.
So yeah. I know that one of the experiences and that leads to one of the experiences that a lot of us have in your presence, when you're doing your work, is this feeling of like, oh no, did you have to say that? Or like, why'd you go there? Or like, it's so awkward, or that's not true. All kinds of feelings like that. And so, Joy, I want to bring you in on this again. If you could say you're like when you have those moments, right? So I was a student way back in the day, but now like someone who's closer to that role, that place, or the hearing from that perspective, what happens to you because I want to get to an example at some point of just like, Oh no, you can't say that.
It's funny.
Do you have an
'cause
example?
Yesterday, not overall. What I'm getting ready to say is how I don't have like a criticism of it. I was talking with DJ yesterday, and I was expressing to her like the way I'm pretty much someone who kind of just takes in information for like what they are.
Mm-hmm.
Like when I was a student and took her class on indigenous ways of living or ways of being, we have to do the weekly assessments on each tenant. But I was always struggling with writing an opinion on it because it's like I don't have a judgment on what it is that they're doing, or if the tenant was observation. I'm just taking in what they are for what they are because that's how it already is set. So in his lectures, if he's relaying information, or even in the really heavy ones, may like be on the Holocaust one, or the one I actually took the semester when you went on your choice and chance, and you touched on like suicide and self-harm, and to pull out someone who says, yeah, I cut, and then Jiggy had to step in like, hold on, Sam, because, you know, the room and individuals and what you could be doing. Even in a moment like that, it's just like taking in and observing the awareness of sharing that awareness.
So for you, that tends to be the way you receive.
Yeah,
you're just
I'm
noticing.
receiving. Yeah,
you're no, but that's actually a good example of where when you talked about cutting and talked to individual people, and I remember that class where there was some real upset, as if you didn't know what you were touching and know what you were doing and know who you could offend or hurt. And so can you speak to like what you were doing and how much awareness did you have? Because that would be a perfect example.
Yeah, well, I had much more awareness than I. What happens for me?
You could say what you were doing.
Well, so what I did was I was talking about invisible strings and the degree to which any of us can make choices, are free to make choices or make decisions about things, and how we're not. In the end, that we're impacted by these invisible strings of structure and culture and
so like a pure
social life.
Sociological perspective.
Pure sociological perspectives, right? So freedom is an illusion, obviously, right? We can be more or less free, but you're just never free. And so I said, even the deepest psychological decisions we make, like suicide or cutting, you know, or these are the things, or we think like, well, of course, if people choose to kill themselves, they don't. You can't, it's not something, and you can't tell someone to kill. Well, I mean, we have a few examples of that sort of thing, but in the end, it's a choice. And,
or that's how we see it.
That's how we see it, but sociologists don't see it that way because we see patterns in suicide, which means there are these invisible strings that are affecting populations of people because we see the same suicide rates over and over and over again. And then we know that the individuals aren't making individual choices, they're making sociological choices. So in that particular class, I was talking about that, and I said, "Well, hang on, let's I'll give an example. Let's talk about cutting. Who cuts? Can I get somebody in the class who cuts, right?" And I just jumped quickly to that, and I should have said, I suppose, what I've been told is I should have said, "Hey, so let's talk about something really sensitive here for a second." And so people, I think there were people in the class who were afraid that I was just blindly walking into something, and in fact I wasn't. But sometimes I make really sort of bold statements like that.
But can you unpack it a little more though? Because I know that there are plenty of things that people tell you, "Oh, Sam, you should not go there. You shouldn't talk about that."
I think for me, it's like, look, if we can't. First off, I can handle it. I can hold those issues quite well, right? I'm aware of it, and I'm not, and I believe deeply that human beings, if held up in a positive way, our best side will come forward. So I'm going to take someone who cuts. If I were to interview somebody, say in a really thoughtful way, and then they're going to leave the interview. They're going to leave the experience more positive than when they started. Like it's going to be a positive experience. That's just the nature of these things. I believe that allows me to be a teacher. that I can walk in a classroom every day and the most people will leave feeling better about themselves than when they came in. That's just part of it. You can't teach if you don't think that. And if you don't think that and you continue to do this thing that looks like teaching, it's not really teaching. You're just playing a role in passing along information, right? So I knew in that class, I'm like, I'm fine. What's the problem? I got this. But, you know, I had a couple of people on my team who were really triggered by it in some way. And so they just stopped me. And I'm like, okay, whatever. I allowed them to stop me. But I oftentimes don't.
And you allowed them to stop you in that case
because I knew I had to, because they were so saying no that they took the class with them. Okay. If they hadn't said that, the class would have gone right with me. Someone would have volunteered. It would have been very positive. And it would have been really positive for other people in the class who also cut. This one person, it would have had a really positive impact on them. But as it was, I had to go with the energy that got created in the room, which was an energy of fear. And so I'm aware of that. Sometimes I just fight through it, but sometimes I say, okay, now just go with it. But you know, most often I do my own thing. So, Jeff, do you have a response to that? You were there. Were you there that semester?
I was there most semesters that we talk about this, and sometimes there are ways in which you can present information that is helpful, and then there's sometimes where it doesn't matter what you do, the information is just going to be seen as bad. Like people just will either disagree with it or they won't want to talk about it. Regardless.
You're saying as a general statement, or how Sam presents information particularly?
Well, generally there are topics people don't want to talk about at all, but specifically about issues like cutting and suicide. I know every time that topic comes up, people always say, well, you're missing all of these things. And it's like, well, we're talking about it from a sociological standpoint, not what you're personally going through.
Yeah, the stream always gets riled up on that.
The stream gets riled up a lot.
Well, the stream gets riled up every other day, so that's not anything new.
Yes.
So what can I just then ask you to articulate? What do you think that people are missing when they get riled up in response to the things that...
Well, they're missing the opportunity to hear something from a perspective they've never heard before. So I live with the idea that most people are just used to following a certain way of seeing the world. And I'm not following that way of seeing the world. I'm coming at it from a different perspective. So if you want to see a different perspective, you got to be ready and willing to walk into that and not try to only continue to see things from your own mind, right? Like, so an example of, say, like cutting, it's like, well, I don't start with the idea that cutting is so horrible and bad. It's like, no, let's try to understand it. Let's look at it. So what is it here? It's not like mental illness. It's not, people aren't, it's like, no. I try to always hold people up to the highest possible standard of what they can be. I start with what people can be. I assume that everybody is healthy and everyone's good and everybody is like wants to grow and learn and expand. And so I begin there, everything that I do.
So you said something that makes me want to ask you. You said I have a different perspective, and this is what you're doing as a teacher, is you're introducing people to that different perspective. And I'm smiling and laughing because I'm like, you're a white guy. What is this different perspective that you're talking about?
Well, it's the sociological perspective for one, but it's also taking the perspective of many, many different people. Like, so we're gonna, let's say we're gonna introduce Sean in a hot minute, because he'll have to leave, and I really want him to hear what he has to say about this. But it's like, look, I've driven through reservations, and I've read many, many things, and I talked to Native Americans from many different perspectives, many different classes and so on. But I'm not Native American. I'm a white guy from Toledo, but I'm really good at hearing other people's ways of seeing it and then walking into that and sitting with it and letting it filter down through me, and then allowing some amalgamation of those perspectives to come out through me.
So you're saying somehow, even though you're a white guy, you're somehow able to help voice all kinds of different perspectives and introduce people to them?
Yes. And especially because I don't pay attention to all of the rules and thoughts that other people have about how I should be.
Mm-hmm.
I don't limit myself by those.
Mm-hmm.
One of the biggest complaints that people have about Social 19 and about your teaching is that somebody even said it in the comments today. They said that you wear your beliefs on your sleeve, and if you don't agree with Sam, then don't even show up, or don't mind showing up, or don't bother showing up. And it's like,
Yeah, I don't see that at all.
the thing that you have to realize is the fact that when people who seem to disagree,
Yeah.
what they're really doing is they'll take a piece of information that they hear somewhere on the internet
Yeah.
or somewhere in their lives, and then they hold that as truth, as
Yeah.
the God-given truth,
Yeah,
and we
yeah.
all do it.
Yeah.
I'll watch a documentary and it'll be like, Pluto is not a planet. And I'll be like, I'm going to stand behind that because that's what I believe is
Yeah,
true.
yeah,
And
yeah.
we'll suck just our entire lives into that belief system. So when Sam, who is somebody who has a lot of experience and years of teaching and talking to people who have different perspectives, and he's like, listen, I want to give you this different view, people who automatically already have their little caves of thought drawn out for themselves, they won't, they'll just be like, well, I disagree with him, so therefore I'm going to get shut down.
But I don't want to dismiss though the idea. I understand what you're saying, Jeff, and I do want you though to respond to that idea of that don't show up if you disagree with Sam. Like really,
Well,
how do you understand that kind of statement as a teacher?
I'm confused by it because the other criticism that is equally as powerful is that that whatever anybody says, I agree with it. So yesterday in class, I was saying the piece about Trump, DACA, right? And like Trump's criticism of Obama, that you can't make this decision, executive decision. And so this woman raised her hand and she said, yeah, but you can make an executive decision because X, Y, and Z. And I said, yeah, you're right. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I got that. So I mean, then there's a criticism there. So it's like, so I guess I'm just sort of confused in a way by it. And I will say this semester, for example,
wait. Can I just say,
Yeah.
I don't think you're confused by it. Actually, this is one of those moments where I
Okay,
want to
go
say
ahead.
because I think there is that part of you that will just agree with a lot of things or endorse oh yeah, that's a perspective that's valid and
even
apparent,
if it's not sometimes.
well, sometimes that would be my criticism, but more
Yeah.
just in terms of seeing the paradoxes of ideas. But can you speak to that directly? That. Oh, the microphone is conspiring.
No, to the idea that
You're not confused
I'm not
actually by it.
confused.
You have, and this would be us helping us to see
Okay,
what
listen.
you're doing as a teacher.
Okay, listen. So, first off, historically speaking, I compared to the number of times that I say, yeah, that's a good point, or yeah, I can buy that. Compared to the number of times I do that, the number of times that I shut somebody down, it's like 50 to 1.
Mm-hmm.
Like earlier this semester, I shut the one woman down. She was making a comment that I'm just like, no, I'm not. We're not going there. That's like, and it turns out she's reading an article from she sent it to me from the mid 1970s, and I'm like, yeah, exactly. All this stuff, everybody has walked away from those ideas. So like, no, that's not acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
But normally I wouldn't do that. So it's like 50 to 1. And so I'm not actually confused by it because I don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
So
even, how do you interpret it then? So and where do you put that into
I think I interpret it more
understanding?
along what Jeff is saying. I think people have they have their own beliefs and they just feel like because I'm not saying what they're saying, I'm shutting them down. And I'm like, well, you're not saying what you're saying because you evidently don't believe in your belief, at least enough that you can bring it forward and reasonably articulate it either to me or the rest of the class. And oftentimes, students will come up after class and they'll try to make an argument about something, maybe against what I said. And I listen to them and I say, well, hang on, what about it? It's rare. It is. And I'm more clear about what I'm saying and what the different problems are or the weaknesses are about what they're saying. And 9 times out of way more than 9 times, 49 times out of 50, they walk away from that conversation saying like, yeah, okay, I see what you're saying. Mm-hmm. So evidently, whoever the person is that said that on the stream, they don't know what's, this is a thing. It's
Well, no,
like,
wait, say it actually. Not actually. So
that's not what's going on.
Uh-huh.
It's clearly not what's going on. And I rarely have students who can articulate a perspective. Really can. I mean, and when I say articulate a perspective, I mean like yesterday's class at least have read something about, let's say, DACA or whatever, right? And they're going to really just disagree with me. I rarely have a student who can do that and who will just really stand up and disagree. It's almost always students. And when I hear about it in groups or whatever it is, it's almost always students who like, I don't know, I just disagree with him. And then the TAs or someone will say, well, why is that? I don't know, I just do because he's wrong. It's like, well, look, if you can't say why, then stop spreading that rumor, so to speak.
Okay, so one part you're saying is that you think that somehow some of what that it isn't about disagreement, it's just about like not being able to accept certain ideas or not being able to process them. But I do want to go to the other side, because I know, and this is part of the work that I do with dialogue all the time and can say I feel in myself, is that sometimes some of the most important things that I can see, I actually have a hard time articulating. And I think I think a lot of times it's like things that aren't part of the dominant culture that haven't been named and articulated are hard to articulate, right? Yeah. So how do you as a teacher make room for that maybe this person who has a disagreement, if it is actually just not able to tell you in the best language what it is that they're seeing that you're not accounting for?
Well, so sometimes people a lot of times people don't understand that when I'm talking and I throw little tiny things out in the room, maybe I'll just drop a statement here, drop a statement there. I'm actually speaking to certain people in the room. I'm speaking to try to get them to say, oh, wait, hang on a minute. Maybe he's not exactly what I thought he was, or maybe, this sort of thing, right? And so I'm really aware of the different audiences in the room constantly. And so I think it's fairly easy for me to, for example, so I'm very aware.
So, how do you make room for, the things that you haven't encountered yet or the things that are just
by never saying that I have the truth, because I don't. I recognize that I am just immensely lacking. Let me go to the statement from the woman earlier in the semester. So she sent me the article. I said, hey, man, see me after class. So I walked her through. I said, look, see me after the next class. So I walked her through this whole field of study of sociobiology. And I said, look, so much of this stuff, this was the very beginning. People were making these really grandiose statements
what was the topic again?
It was about attraction and physical features and so on and so forth.
This woman was making an argument that there were biological reasons
for
attractiveness, not just sociological.
To certain features, right? Okay. And I said, look, I never believe anything is just sociological. So I'm like the sociologist who's the least sociologist of any sociologist you'll meet, because I account for, I don't know, the reasons might be that there's a God and the God just sends signals down to us. I have no idea. Like, I'll account for whatever. But anyway, so I said, let me give you the story on this. Here's where this came from, and here's why it's there, and so on, right? Then about 3 weeks later, I was reading this piece in Science about this whole new ways of seeing attraction, that they're actually thinking, whoa, maybe some of this early stuff in sociopath, they're going back and revisiting it. And I went, oh my God, hang on a minute. I'm going to have to go back in the classroom and say, like, okay, I'm actually now got schooled by the most recent stuff that's coming out, which I'm always aware of, right? Which is why I never make hardcore statements, because I know that somebody on the stream or somebody somewhere is going to come up and be like, by the way, check this out. And then I got to come back and say, okay, I'm an idiot, which isn't that difficult for me, but I'd rather not have to say it. I'd rather be wishy-washy on things and not have to say I'm an idiot. I'd rather be able to say I don't know, right? But in any case, then I read it further and I didn't have to come back in. Because it wasn't really, they were just, once again, hypothesizing what could possibly be and not saying, no, this is what's happening. And so
I think that's one of my favorite things about your class is the fact that you're not afraid to not know. And somebody on the chat said something about me defending you. I'm not defending Sam.
Yeah.
I've-
You sort of are, Jeff. But,
Well,
that's-
but it's also from 10 semesters of this
Yeah.
class, and me actually knowing you personally and understanding the reasonings behind why you do the things you do.
Yeah.
So when somebody watches this class, even if it's the second semester and they're still watching the live stream, they think they're going to understand why you do certain things, but they don't.
Yeah.
Because
But
they
hang-
also,
wait.
but they don't have these like 2-3 hour long conversations with you personally, one-on-one
Yeah.
about oh, what do you think about this and bringing this thing in? And
but the thing is though, because you have that information or that knowledge or that trust, even, you know, I mean,
Yeah.
you could disagree with things and you maybe have a certain trust. I still
Totally.
think though it's important because that you're not assuming that people in your class or on the stream have any kind of trust of you, and shouldn't. Why should they? You know. So the point. So I think you being in this moment having to articulate some of what's behind why you do what you do, and because even though you're saying like I don't believe everything I'm saying, you also say things sometimes in way you have the wishy-washy part, but you also have the part that's like this is just true, my friend.
Yeah,
So,
you're
you know.
right.
And so I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm saying
usually
it's part of a method that we're trying. I'm hoping that we're trying to understand or give you the opportunity to articulate more.
Okay, but oftentimes the things that I say, look, this is just fact here. It'll be something like, i.e., we don't know why X, Y, or Z. That's a fact, right? Or like, for example, that it could be the yesterday, right? Undocumented immigrants commit less crime than native-born U.S. citizens. That everybody who studies and looks at the issue concludes that by far and away. I will stand behind that. That's fact. That is just a given.
That's not true, because on NBC.com I saw every story about native or immigrants causing all of the crimes, so therefore you're
in
wrong.
that city, exact,ly. Yeah,
That's what happens every single time.
And
but
in
wait,
the chats, yeah.
hang on a second though, because you have to, you can't assume that somehow what you're doing, the form is different than what every other person with a microphone and an audience is doing,
Yeah,
right?
I know,
So,
I got you.
and I'm not saying you do personally. I'm just like, I'm speaking to like, I don't think that anybody who listens to you should just assume that, oh wait, this is the space where a true perspective is
Yeah, I
coming.
got you, I
You
got
you have to earn the idea that it's true. And so what I'm saying is a lot of you as a teacher, a lot of students over the years, and I do want to hear from Sean at some point. Students over the years have not said that, oh, what Sam is saying is true, but like have somehow learned something from whatever it is that you're doing in the classroom.
Well, okay,
Or
perfect segue. Let's find out.
so, right. So I'm not saying like it has to be true or not true, but like there is this other secret sauce maybe that's happening.
Yeah, that something goes on, evidently.
So how do we bring? How do we
maybe
introduce
can-
Sean?
Why don't you introduce him and say who he is? Or I can.
Yeah,
and we
you can.
grab the chair.
Yeah.
So
Where is he sitting?
maybe you'll sit right next to Lori.
Share this mic?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Can we share this chair?
So
No,
Sam, you
there's
introduce
a black
him.
chair over here. So Sean came to us as a young man from the Navajo reservation out in Four Corners, and so we were just talking before. I can't really say New Mexico or Arizona. Let's talk from a native perspective from the area that is identified as the Four Corners. Came here as a young. It was after your military days, right?
Yes, that's correct. Though back in, I believe, 96.
96.
Was the year that I took the class. Oh.
And then you were a student in the class, and then you worked as a TA in the class back.
That's correct.
Before World in Conversation started, Resource and probably before when the TAs were, I don't know. Lori wasn't even working with the TAs then. I don't know who he's working with them.
Yeah, I did take a class. I think it was 409
Or something.
and that was when we started working as the TAs for that class. But it was split into two groups, and so we alternated days.
So let me.
This is like ancient times.
Yeah,
Yeah. So listen. So what? And what are you doing now?
I am working for Indian Health Services right now.
Uh-huh.
So
So in your background, you were Navajo.
yes, Navajo. Grew up on the reservation. Was part of the Relocation Act that happened back in 1984, I believe. I don't remember. I was just a youngster back then. But God, it seems like so many years ago. So, yeah, we relocated several times due to the expansion of another tribe's reservation and stuff. So we finally settled in Sanders, Arizona, which is southwestern portion of the Navajo Nation, and I guess we've settled there. We've settled there since about 1989 or around that time.
Isn't that? It's just so ironic, right?
Mhm.
Here are you, 100% native, saying like, "Oh yeah, we settled here and there in that spot." I mean, it's just the irony of that. So listen, go back to 1-8. What do you remember from your days?
As from the previous question before, I believe that it was kind of like you were the artist and you had the picture, you presented the picture, and then it was us that needed to decide what that picture was, and and like you said, not afraid of being wrong or right or anything like that. I mean, it really even arguments or anything of that nature, it would really it would always open up my mind. And at the end of the class, it was kind of like I'd leave the class as like, wow, I'm totally confused. I have to figure something out to do I go this way, do I go this way, or do I split it?
Wait,
And-
can you say, I mean, I'm going back to this thing, like this white guy made this picture and showed it to you. So like, can you remember, or can you say like what maybe was one of the pictures that you saw that then you had to figure out what you were seeing yourself?
Wow, you're making me think.
I know, but maybe
Break
it's
up,
not possible.
dude, go
Just like
through
what's
the
in your
cobwebs.
what's in your mind's eye? Like it doesn't have to be like the exact like, oh, this was the lesson, but like when you picture that work, and here you are back visiting us, right?
I think the lesson was to really seek the gray areas of the social norm and what expectations are of society and stuff. So I think that was to look into the gray areas. Like I said, we talked about Native American culture for I think maybe a day. And then that was it. But every other thing, and the Holocaust was one of the big issues, and that we went in depth to, and it really opened my mind to think like what society has established, what's written in books, but there was several other events. I remember one of the class assignments was going to see Elie Wiesel was one of the Holocaust survivors, and it was a Q&A at the end of the thing, and everybody had pretty much standardized questions, and I always remember this. Probably about a little kid, about 10, 11 years old, got up to the mic, and he just asked him flat out who he was, and it really stumped him, and he was like, he had to think about it, and so it's just being able to think outside of that social norm, I think. And you have to paint the picture yourself and be able to look beyond those norms too.
Joy, can I ask Joy?
Yeah.
Can you say, I mean, I know what you said earlier about you sort of just started taking things in and receiving what's around you. Can you respond to that same Can you respond to that same metaphor, I guess, of like this white guy paints a picture and then people look at it. What, what about you?
I feel As a Black woman going into the class, if you are someone that is closed-minded, it could be really easy to dismiss anything coming out of his mouth just because of his physicality. But he does relay things with the consideration and the conclusions of the groups of people he is talking about from his direct engagement of them. So it's not like it's completely one-sided or his disconnected assumptions of them. But I do think that when given the opportunity, always he pulls the representative down, even if it's just from class, like the person cutting or asking for queer people to come down, or specifically, I think Tuesday's class, it was pansexual. Or the eagerness to have Sean come to speak directly as a Native person. So that's something that I always appreciated, always in any conversation of any platform or group, like politics, is you have white men around the table making decisions for groups of people that they have no relation on what it is that their lives are actually like, but yet you can choose in what you think and you feel is right for those people without having those people even being a part of the conversation or at the table. That's in a method of Sam's teaching. And I will say, as a student, and since working, being someone who took the class and wanting to work under him and then now doing it for, I guess it's maybe the 5th or 6th semester, seeing even in this short period of time the evolution of his teachings from moments like being called out for being wrong. So I'll see the same lectures over and over again, but there's always some type of element to it that's different, or even if it's the same exact facts, the way that it's presented may be different from the learning experience, from the critiques of a class, of a student, or being called out on something that if someone think he said something that was completely unthoughtful, like yesterday when you were talking on the Trump administration, and there was one guy you called racist, and when the guy at the panel was like, what did you say about that? Because I don't think so. And he was like, yeah, that was, I don't like when I say things that aren't really thoughtful, and that wasn't a really thoughtful statement. And sat in it.
Even though
it was actually correct.
Yeah.
What does that mean? What do you?
So the comment was about Stephen Miller, one of the advisors for the president, and Sam said something about him being racist. He's a racist person or something. Yeah, racist bones.
Many racist bones in his body.
And Sean?
Yes, Sean.
Sean was the guy who's sitting in class, the Turning Point dude. And he was like, can you...
He put the red card up.
Yeah, right away. And he was like, what...
What about him as racist?
What about him as racist?
Can you go back to that?
And then Sam just kind of was like, I shouldn't have said that. But then if you did any Googling, you knew that he had 900 emails with Breitbart about, and then the terminology that he used. And I didn't read the emails, so I'm not going to say it was definitively, but every reporting that I saw on it was like he said some really white nationalist, racist stuff.
Yeah, he sounded like a white nationalist. But nonetheless, what I didn't say I shouldn't. I thought about it, and and what I said was, I don't like it when I just make an offhanded statement like that, because it does have an impact, and it's not very thoughtful, and it's not very smart. And so if I'm not going to spend time talking about what I mean by it, I shouldn't say it.
And
especially in service of the gray areas that you Sean were talking about as sort of like the most important part of the thinking outside the box.
Yeah.
Right. So that just doesn't
totally
serve that.
No, listen, it doesn't serve it at all. And I gave Sean a high five for calling me out on it, because I'm like, yeah. I shouldn't have said
So wait, can I just, what this Sean is saying, the one sitting next to me, because you made the comment about we spent probably, if we did, one day on Native issues in the midst of the class that you were taking, and that just reminds me, Sam, of like all the different, connecting also to what Joy was saying, all the different people that are in the classroom, constituents of learning, so to speak, right? So how are you, your classes have evolved, like you're talking about that, so like, What do you want to? So Sean hasn't.
Listen,
been in your
if
class.
Sean was here today, like if he
I mean,
was
he
in
is
my
here
class,
today.
no, okay, hang on, hang on. If he was taking my class today,
Yeah.
he'd be pulled down on the front of me on day 2. I'd be like, all right, man, come on down. Where are you from? And we'd be talking about it. I'd be interviewing him. Like, hey, do you have photos? Do you have this? Like, let's talk.
So what's
but I didn't do that so much back then.
Yeah,
I
tell
didn't-
us what's different now that that wouldn't be, that he wouldn't have had the same
Well,
experience.
well, what's different is I used to think that the job of a teacher was to have a certain amount of information and somehow convey that. And now I realize, you know what? It's actually much more interesting when students can convey the information themselves. And so, hence, that's why I want to bring people down to the front. I could talk about people who are pansexual. Like, I don't need someone to do that. I could go into that. I could paint a really awesome picture of it, of how people experience the reality. I could do a pretty good job, but like, why should I?
But wait,
someone else do it.
here's one of those
Okay.
things. Like, what is actually happening, or what do you see happening as a teacher that says to you, I need to have these individuals and it would be Sean if he were here on a
Well,
class day,
okay,
speaking of something of their
Okay.
experience.
A huge part of it has nothing to do with pedagogy whatsoever. A huge part of it is that after 30 years, I just grew tired of listening to myself. And it's much more interesting to hear from other people. So Sean
wait,
would
but
be
this
infinitely more interesting. When you and I would talk about your life on the res, like outside of class, like when you were a TA and so on, I'm like, I go back to those conversations, infinitely more interesting than what I would say. And so I'm like, well, why wouldn't I pull you up? This is the thing. Like, I got to bring you up. You know what I mean? If I find out something about somebody that, it's like, why wouldn't I? Like in the class on Tuesday, all these students in class who like grew up in these different countries. It's like, oh, what's that like? You know what I mean? Well, I could talk about what it's like, but what's the point? I'm tired of listening to me. So.
Do you want to respond to that, Sean? What you're picturing, what you're sensing?
I agree with you. Like when you hear it from the individual's perspective, I mean, it paints just a really different picture. It makes it. I guess you'd say more vibrant. You add more vibrance to it, and it paints a better picture too. I mean, like you said, you can talk about it, but I mean, are the experiences actually there, or do you actually know what can you actually apply your 5 senses to it? Like from knowledge from a book, you can't necessarily do that as if you were actually standing there and experiencing it.
Yeah, and at this stage in my life, it's rare that something's going to come into the room that I haven't had a conversation with somebody about. So it's like, yeah, I can talk about it because I've had those conversations, but now I'm like less interested in doing that.
But that's an example though, Sam, of when you say I'm less interested, I don't believe you. I think that what you have understood, but say if this isn't true, somehow I feel like intuitively that Sean talking about his life on the res is going to be way more important, meaningful. Like you said, the 5 senses will be present,
Yes.
as opposed to you telling a story that isn't yours.
Okay, yes, exactly. Okay, so here's the other side, and I want to hear the 119 team weigh in on this. Sometimes I'll bring somebody up to the front to talk to them, and they just don't bring it, man. And I'm trying to pull it out of them, and I'm just like, come on, man, you got something in there, and I'm working it, and I'm asking open-ended questions, and I'm like, and then I just finally have to say, okay, go sit down.
Well, to that end, sometimes you just say, I need a volunteer, and they don't know what they're coming down for, and then they're just confused, and they don't know what to say. They
That's
don't have
true.
an opinion. They don't want to have an opinion. They don't want to be wrong. They don't want to be loud and wrong at the same time.
Yeah, that's bad.
But that doesn't happen nearly as much as it used to.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm a little.
that's true.
No, that's because of Lori's coaching. She's trying to get me to be more selective in how I pick the volunteers. Don't just go grab anybody. And then people just like, yeah, I want to volunteer. And, okay, so yeah, you're right.
Okay.
But there are times you know it, right? You must be back here you're directing the stream. You know when I'm struggling.
But hey, so wait, so you're saying, let me turn this. So you're saying I do have to acknowledge, or we have to acknowledge that there's sometimes without the person who has the experience just isn't able to. Here we're going back to that. Isn't able to articulate it in a way that can bring people in, right? So that in that moment, you as a teacher have to do something
and it's
else.
hard when you stand. Here, Joy, when you
I haven't thought about it.
you walked out into the room when MK was here. It's all the kinds of things you're going to say, and then suddenly you're standing in front of all those people and the people watching the stream, and your mind doesn't work so quickly, right? It's not so easy. So people get stage fright. And even though I'm asking them questions, but they're like so I have that goes on. Yeah. And I'm not a pro at asking questions. Lori will say, I should tell the team, it's almost every Tuesday Lori listens to the live stream, and then it'll be 5 minutes of her saying, hey, when you were talking to so and so, if you'd asked this question, it really would have blown it open. I'm like, okay, yeah, all right, thanks for that. And then that other person, if you'd have asked, here's the way you could have framed that question. I'm like, yeah, if I was the master of asking questions, but I'm not. And so I'm also not the best person to pull things out of people. So I will take half of the responsibility of that for sure. I know that a better interviewer or a more thoughtful sociologist or teacher or whatever could do better with whatever they have in front of the room would be fine. So,
but I'm still on the note though that it's not that you're just tired of hearing yourself, because I feel like that undermines the intention of knowing that it really is powerful when someone articulates for the class, for other people, other humans, their experience. I love how you said like the five senses are all there, and then when I think when they do that matters way more than anything anybody could say for them.
Yes, and so Sean, next time you come out to Penn State, it will definitely make sure that you're here on a Tuesday or Thursday, and we will definitely be bringing you into the class and pulling you up. And
that'll work.
For sure.
I mean, try not to pass out in front of all 300 people.
But listen,
300?
800.
800.
Yeah.
It's 800
and the
now?
stream.
No.
So listen, the issue is though that when you were first in the class, I would have been had I brought you up, I would have been asking you questions. I'm thinking back to your personality. You would have given pretty kind of short answers, and you wouldn't have been as all of your senses wouldn't have been rocking and rolling in the way that they are today. You're older, you're more mature, you know yourself better. So it would have been okay for students. It would have been fine. You would have been all right. And interesting because you're Navajo, right? So anything you say would be like, whoa, but you would be an example of someone who would have kind of gotten us half there. But today, you'd kill it. Today, it'd be really an amazing class because you have so much experience and you're able, I'm sure, I can tell by talking to you, you're just in a different space. So, do you have any thoughts about that? Anybody on the...
About what?
What I just said to him.
About how he'd be more personally equipped to come down the class if he was randomly called out versus in 86
versus 96 yeah. Either way you weren't born.
I was actually thinking maybe whether if it's more to do with your experience in learning or if it's more to do with how you are affected by those invisible strings and the times of inclusivity at that time.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't imagine 96, even today, I'm not sure which semester it was, but there's usually there was a time when you were asking, how many people have ever met a Native person? No hands. So in 96, what would that have been like socially and what it was for the culture of America to be at that time? Something we notice today is how more black and brown it has been drastically, even since last semester, this semester. And I can only imagine it's probably 100.
Yeah, what was your
maybe
experience?
Maybe 95% white faces in 96.
Yeah, way more white faces.
So how that would have been just from the psyche of people there, just from the times versus today.
Yeah, what was your experience at Penn State overall on regarding race and culture issues?
God, I really don't recall. I mean, I spent most of my I think I spent most of my time studying, but
I doubt you did, my friend.
I doubt I did.
Nobody ever does.
Being in a place like State College.
You know, I mean, I'm pretty. I always thought of myself as outgoing, and so you know, I've never had any issues with anybody, and you know, if I don't think I ever really encountered any issues, and you know, I think a lot of it was. I mean, it may have been the question of it would have been like, well, what is he? Is he Mexican? Is he Puerto Rican? It's like I don't think he's native because we have any natives out here.
So when you would tell people you were Navajo, would they have follow-up questions?
Yeah, a lot of times they did, and they were the joke I always told them, I say, yeah, if you ever visit there, you got to bring your passport. We're exclusive. So but I always told them that, and you know, I think it was a good icebreaker, and so I mean. And then after our conversation, their questions, I was like, "Oh, you don't have to bring a passport.
Yeah,
just wait for me at the gate."
Yeah,
yeah. But like I don't ever recall any specific issues of anything or any negative interactions. So I mean, and like I said, I tried to be as outgoing as I could too. So I mean, I was in Bellefonte, as in.
Yeah, you lived right off Pew Street for quite a while,
Pew
near
Street,
us.
and then down the road. I don't even remember the name. Bullsburg, I think.
Oh yeah.
So
You know, so one of the issues, though, going back to that is, for me as a teacher, it was much more risky for me back in the day to bring people up and just engage. And I taught lots of 400 level classes, like small classes, and we had lots and lots of conversation. But in this class, it was just riskier. I didn't know what was going to happen, and I was younger and less skilled and less comfortable in that way. Always comfortable with people from all backgrounds, but.
Can I ask you, it seems like one of the things that we're saying, or at least that I'm hearing in this, is that another evolution of your pedagogy, actually, and I don't know if you're seeing it, but anyway, if you could respond to it, is that you actually aren't teaching alone anymore, right? So you're teaching now, it's almost a collaborative event. And how does that change what you're doing as a teacher?
Okay, having Jeff sit over behind the podium, right? Having the two of you in the back room as a consistent sort of presence, and even though you're here in the back room, I know that you're holding things down in a way. It's like you're behind me, like, you know, you have my back, and I know that I can come out of class, and if something happens or you say something, I know I'm going to get a response. You know, you're going to talk about it. And Jeff, in the moment, you know, on the screen right there, I just know there's always like
those constant factors.
Yeah, just the people who are there. It really matters. So I never feel like I'm alone. It's a team. It very much is a team effort.
So that's even a different dimension. I was thinking the students that are part of, you know, telling their stories and telling their opinions and perspectives. But you're also talking about this kind of team that's actually supporting the whole structure of the class. Like, that's really interesting. And I wonder what you do. How that's different for you then? How does that make you a different teacher?
It means that certainly I can take certain risks, and I can push in ways that I'm going to get a response from you all. Like, there's a, you know, like the people maybe who are in the class or watching the stream, they might have the idea that I'm selecting people who will automatically just agree with me or whatever, you know, or support me. And that's not the case. I have a lot of people around me who I feel like when I'm off the rails or a little bit off on something, they're very quick to say, hey man, you missed that, or you did.
It's almost like people assume that whenever you pick a volunteer, you give them a 20 question survey and you're like, all right, answer this, and then if you answer all the correct answers, my correct answers, then we'll accept you. It's like, no.
Like, it's scripted.
People think it's scripted, or that we choose specific people for specific purposes.
If we were scripted, we would have way more followers than we do.
You know, but even, you know, realize that, you know, people don't realize that, you know, say like, when I have someone who's part of the, you know, the leading the Democratic students or Republican students or students for Bernie or, you know, turning point, which is this Sean from yesterday, right? It's like when I have people in class like that who have a really strong perspective, I feel like this is going to be a great semester, right? Like I got these eyes on me, right? And they're going to tell me when I've kind of moved in some direction, and I want that, right? So I don't, if I'm it's, yeah, I think I will just leave it at that.
Can I ask you, Sam, I always ask this question to anyone who I'm talking to who has been talking a lot, like the focus has been on them. I always am interested in like, well, what are you hearing yourself say as you're saying all these things? Because we were all really talking about your work. So what are you hearing?
Well, I guess I'm hearing in a way that it is complicated. There are many more layers to it than it would appear, and there are many more layers to my thinking than probably it would appear. There are many more questions that I have than I think anybody would imagine, because you assume that when someone walks in a big room full of people and they talk as confidently as I appear to talk, you naturally assume that person knows what they're thinking, and I don't. And so like yesterday when we got to the end and with the Trump impeachment and people came down the front and asked, well, what do you think's going to happen? And I said, I have no idea. Well, do you think it should be impeached? I have no idea. I could make an argument for yes, and I can make an argument for no. And that's probably most contentious issues. DACA, right? Like, I don't know. Like, I don't know. I really don't know. And so I guess what I'm hearing myself saying, maybe in a way I'm validating myself, that I'm really just trying to figure it all out. Just what I say I'm doing, and I really am. Gosh. Does it seem like...
I mean, yesterday you said, I don't get paid enough to fix the problems, I just get paid enough to point them out.
Yeah.
I feel like that's the most relatable
statement.
that's the most relatable thing you've said this semester in my book.
Yeah.
That's just my opinion.
Yeah.
I think when there's moments like that, it's for like comic relief. I don't know whether it's on purpose or not, but there are those little tidbits when Sam are funny, and I don't know if it's on purpose, but I think it helps to take the weight off the topic or the fact that of the masses and being introduced to think about these topics. And if people are considering want to be able to make those changes, like with the slave chocolate. Well, I don't know. Well, now do I feel guilty? And then you laugh.
Yeah.
Another.
Yeah, they're heavy topics.
Mm-hmm.
I'm asking about timing.
Yeah, but if you turn the microphone.
Well, I'm just asking. Actually, didn't want to turn the microphone because I don't know where we're at with time.
We have
so
5 more minutes.
Oh, we have 5 more.
1:40.
So you probably have enough time for final thoughts.
Is there anything on the stream that we should address that's
The stream is a mess today. That's just my opinion on that.
the chat?
To be honest, this entire conversation, I've been half in and half out because I've been watching the chat the entire time. The most infuriating bullshit I've ever seen. And
We just
I
been
wouldn't
over here
and
just
I,
looking at each other like, what is happening?
Well, hang on. Don't call it bullshit.
No, and I said it for a reason.
All right, okay.
Because when we point things out, if it doesn't, again, go into the monologue that you've been telling yourself for the longest of times, no matter what information is brought up, statistics that are brought up, it doesn't matter. It's always a person's personal belief system.
Yeah, it
that
really
is always
doesn't
going to
matter.
overwrite whatever the truth may or may
The
not be.
data show that very clearly, by the way. That's why, in some ways, I stop emphasizing statistics so much, because it doesn't matter what the numbers are. It matters just what people want to believe.
And that's where I am today.
That's so it's like the undocumented immigrants commit, 40 to 50% less crime.
What you're saying right now is what is infuriating
That's what they've been
me
talking
on the
about
chat.
in the chat this
Well, all you got to do
entire
is
time.
you just got to go to the FBI data, man. They're very clear. Right?
No, it doesn't matter. You need to go and look at articles about.
Off CNN.
No, you need to go to articles from Breitbart or whatever right wing website you want to go
Hey,
to.
look, the data I gave yesterday were from the Cato Institute. That is the libertarian, the premier libertarian, i.e., right wing organization in the world, of which, by the way, I have been a member, but nonetheless, it is it's way more conservative than Breitbart or Fox News or anything. Those are the numbers. That's where they're from. I mean, so this is the thing. That's where so you ask this. I don't get tripped up over it. I don't think about it. I don't pay attention to the Twitter feed. I don't really pay attention to the chat. I don't want to listen to to people who just want to listen to themselves. So it's either like, look, I'm trying to be thoughtful here. I'm trying to produce multiple sides. I thought I did an amazing job of supporting Trump's Supreme Court case yesterday. I laid it out why you could argue, why you could shut down DACA. I get that. I think I did a pretty cool job, if you were a Trump supporter, of laying out what the Ukraine issue is and getting to the place of, what we do with this impeachment. I thought I really got to the point where if you were a supporter, you could say, oh, yeah, what Sam said was really supportive of Trump. If you didn't like Trump, you could get to the place where he said, oh, yeah, what he said was really supportive of impeaching him. I don't know. There's nothing more I can do other than just continue to do what I do and not trip up over people who just want to believe what they want to believe. And that's not me. It's not me. I'm always looking to believe something. And you, Lori, you know this better than anybody. I'm always trying to find ways to disprove, or not disprove, but to discredit whatever it is I think might be true. I'm always looking for that. That's how I teach. So, okay. So hang on. So that's a frustration that I have, but I don't let it stop me. I keep just going.
Well, what it's making me think about is just the fact that the discussion groups started, and actually my whole work started when we started putting students into discussion groups for class, and it was just so clear to me, and I don't have to be introduced to this about my own thinking because I get it, that the facts, if there are any, don't matter as much as what people believe. And so I'm not saying that in a way of a critique as much as an isness, right? And so there are stakes to changing one's beliefs. Like, first of all, our beliefs are formed in our communities with people that we trust, and if they believe them, or if we don't believe that anymore, whatever it is that's connected to our communities, well, what does that actually mean for us, and what is true even? So anyway, I don't actually think it's something to fight as much as it is to really understand, which makes you probably, Sam, and me always really interested in what people see and believe, because I also don't know when I'm encountering my own beliefs, right? So I feel like those beliefs, even, I don't care about the truth because beliefs are part of the truth, right? And obviously there's things that don't fit that formula, but what I'm saying is, like, I'm always interested in what Sean believes, if it's different than mine, because it gives me the opportunity to challenge something that might actually not be true that I think.
And so how I've become a much better teacher and a better human being is that, whereas in the past, if Sean said something that was just really not very smart, I wouldn't say anything because, okay, he's Navajo. I mean, I probably shouldn't say anything. Today, I'd be just as quick to call him out, to call Sean out, as to call Joy or Darnisha out, or call Jeff out, as I would to call anybody else, any average, middle class American white person, right? And that's a huge difference in my place in the world.
Wait, that's a whole conversation in itself.
Yeah, we can come back to that
but
one
what
day.
Are you actually saying?
I'm
that's
saying
a really
that
important pedagogical statement.
The beliefs, so as a teacher, so I do see that, we live in these community of beliefs, right? And we all do. And most of us as teachers, most of us in this world, we sort of develop around a certain way, when we're talking about race, a certain way of understanding race and what the issues are and what's at stake and so on. And I've sort of gone beyond where I used to be. Like, no, stop seeing the world as a white man. Like, get past that. See the world as, see yourself, understand your place in the world, understand all of what that means. And of course I have. I spent 35 years as a teacher dealing with that, working with that. But I'm also a teacher, and everybody gets to everybody has to be challenged. Doesn't matter who it is or how it is. You got to challenge everybody. And I've just become much better at that. So I will challenge the liberals as quickly as I will the conservatives and so on. Right? Okay. We do have to cut. So final thoughts.
Yes, we do. Everyone, final thoughts right now. Let's start with Jeff, I guess? Yes, Jeff.
For the 84th time.
Oh my God.
For the 84th time, America's heart has been shattered by another school shooting yesterday. And as I continue to watch the news articles and the stories and hearing what's happened to the kids who witnessed the incident happen, dude, I just can't. Yesterday was an emotional day for me when I left work because I went home and watched these stories. And just to imagine myself being, like when you talked about how when you were in high school and you guys had to hide underneath the desks.
Yeah, grade school.
For a nuclear blast.
Yeah.
These students went through, at this particular high school, went through months of training about what to do if a shooter happens. And they actually had to go through with it. I can't imagine myself going through my high school years doing that. Mm-hmm. We never did that. And that was less than 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. So my final thought is that my heart and just my being is going towards not only the victims and their families, but also the shooter's family. Because he was 16 years old. Mm-hmm. And his parents lost their son that day. Even if he's still alive, they will lose their son in a way. And I cannot imagine. I wanted to talk about that really bad today, but I slide that in there.
No, it's good. Thanks for saying that. Niche. Wait, you go last.
Yeah.
You gotta go last.
I have to go last. How about our guest today? Yeah. What did you guys think? Final thoughts, you guys.
Final thoughts. I'd say, continue doing with the steps that you take. Take that approach. Continue to put that picture out there for them, and have each individual student create their own picture of what you present. I mean, it's amazing stuff. I mean, I'm interested to see what it has become now, especially 23 years later. And just continue. I mean, it's awesome. I mean, being able to think outside the box, being able to see one side of the argument, and then maybe persuade your own thoughts on something too. So I think continue to do what you do.
Cool. Dr. Mulvey.
It was fun to be here. I really appreciate you all letting me into your circle to have this conversation. I like pushing Sam to say more about what he does, but I also mostly right now I'm feeling really touched to have you have shown up today, Sean, and just the power of the connections that have happened for us through being in a classroom with other humans, and just the fact that so many of these relationships haven't stopped in the classroom, but that they've transcended just those simplistic relationships, and that we over time can continue to be connected. I'm really moved by that. So thanks.
Before Joy and Darnisha were even born, you were sitting in the classroom.
I was born in '99, so
I feel old. I was a '95 kid.
You were too. Hey, my final thoughts are, thanks for coming, Sean. Thanks for coming, Lori, and thanks as always for the team. You guys killed it.
My final thoughts is kind of just something that's ringing in my head based off the last segment of conversation, and it's that there's fact and then there's reality, and they may not always coincide, but I think that there's a responsibility of challenging or trying to view the different perspective of what your reality is based off the given facts, because that seems to be the conundrum in what we're talking about with the conversation going on in the live stream, and the inability of people wanting to accept for what is based off what they know or even experience. And it's not that that's wrong, but it's just that there's always a different side.
So I guess it's time for my final thought then. Okay, so first of all, Thank you guys for coming. It's always nice to see you, Lori, and it's so nice to meet you, Sean. As always, we're sponsored by World in Conversation, so go out in the world and conversate. It was a really good conversation, getting to pick your brain, Sam. It's always cool to be here, and it's so nice to think that, like, it's so nice I know that you think that we're back here supporting you. It's nice to hear that confirmed, though. That's what I was trying to get out. Also, stay hydrated, drink your water. That's all I have to say.
Cool.
All right.
Hasta luego.
That is episode number 14. Have a good weekend, everybody. We will see you next week, Tuesday.
Yep. Do good today.